Welcome to another episode of You Are Not a Frog. What to do when you're out of fuel. Do you think you're superhuman and can carry on going despite whatever macro and micro stresses life throws at you? Or do you feel on the edge of burnout and are wondering how you're going to make it to the end of next week? In this podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Jess Harvey, a GP partner and GB triathlete, to talk about what happened when she ran out of fuel and hit burnout. We talk about how we so often ignore the symptoms and signs for too long, and why resting and refueling is as important, if not more important, than what we're doing in the first place. So listen to this episode to find out what happened to Jess when she experienced one too many holes in her energy bucket. Listen if you want to find out how we justify our behaviour and why we think it's okay to keep going. And listen to find out how to check in with yourself and plug the holes in your energy bucket. Welcome to You Are Not a Frog, the podcast for GPs, doctors and other busy professionals in high-stress jobs. Even before the coronavirus crisis, many of us were feeling stressed and one crisis away from not coping. We felt like frogs in boiling water, overwhelmed and exhausted. But this has crept up on us slowly, so we hardly notice the extra long days becoming the norm. And let's face it, frogs generally only have two choices: stay and be boiled alive, or jump out of the pan and leave. But you are not a frog, and that's where this podcast comes in. You have many more options than you think you do. It is possible to be master of your own destiny and to craft your life so that you can thrive even in the most difficult of circumstances. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Morris, GP, turned executive coach and specialist in resilience at work. I work with doctors and other organisations all over the country to help professionals and their teams beat stress and take control of their work. I'll be talking to friends, colleagues and experts, all who have an interesting take on this, so that together we can take back control to survive and thrive in our work and lives. For those of you listening to the podcast who need to get some continuous professional development hours under your belts, did you know that we create a CPD form for every episode so that you can use it for your documentation and in your appraisal? Now, if you're a doctor and you're a fan of inspiring CPD and you're sick of wasting a lot of time you don't have on boring and irrelevant stuff, and you want to put those 50 hours that you have to do to good use, then why not check out our Permission to Thrive membership? This is a new venture, a joint venture between me and Caroline Walker, who's the Joyful Doctor. And every month we're going to be releasing a webinar fully focused on helping you thrive in work and in life. Every webinar is accompanied by an optional workbook with a reflective activity so that you can take control of your work and your life, you can increase your well-being, and you can design a life that you're going to love. You've got to get those hours, so why not make your CPD count? Choose CPD that's good for you. So check out the link to find out more. Now, thanks for listening to my shameless plug, and back to the episode. It's really great to have with me on the podcast today, Dr. Jess Harvey. Now, Jess is a GP partner. She's also a GB triathlete. So she's competed in her age group for Great Britain, and she has a particular interest in resilience, wellbeing, and particularly rest and recuperation after a series of, well, she describes them as fortunate events that has happened to her. So Jess, just welcome for a start. It's really great to have you.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me on.
Could you start with by telling us about, what brought you to this interest in wellbeing, resilience and rest? And what's your story? Because I know you've got quite a few things have happened to you over the past few years.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting few years. And I guess if you sort of think about things in those sort of chapters in your lives, those headings, there's been a few that have definitely sort of marked my way thus far. I guess as I we had a great upbringing, normal school and all that sort of thing. Medical school was great, really enjoyed it. And I think the first sort of chapter heading thereafter was when sort of towards the end of my medical school, I developed an eating disorder, and it was sort of full-blown anorexia by the time that I sort of qualified. And I guess it's a period of my life that you look back on and think, it definitely changed me. And I think it's taught me a lot of things. But I remember I started running, and through medical school, and when I was a kid, I used to play loads and loads of hockey. But then in medical school, I trained in Cardiff. So we went all across Wales doing placements. And it got difficult trying to play for a team in Cardiff when I was placed in RIL for 6 weeks. So I started running as something else to do and found out I loved it. And I carried on doing that. And with my eating disorder is obviously when you sort of drop to a low weight, you get to a point where actually running isn't really that conducive. I remember the moment that was my sort of pin drop moment for that, which was I tried to go for a run and I got down the road and literally couldn't. And I just didn't have the energy or the wherewithal to move. And that was the moment that I thought, right, okay. And then you sort of realise then is that was what I loved doing. And that was always my get out for stress from work, for everything else, was running. And so all of a sudden I realised what I was doing, it wasn't what I was doing to myself, of my body, my bone health, my fertility, all of that stuff. It was that my coping mechanism was going to go. So that was what then sort of took me out. And that was the moment that I was like, well, I'm going to do something about this. So then I sort of started eating and definitely things improved. And I guess that was kind of that little chapter that started to then move on. And I think it's something that when you've had an eating disorder like that is you sort of live with it, and like I've got a healthy BMI and stuff now, but yeah, it's something that you live with, I think, for a lot of people. Some people fully recover, but I think I'm more one of those people who probably lives with it, if I'm honest. But it certainly taught me how much sort of exercise was important to me as a person, not for weight control or anything like that, but for other benefits that I got from it. So that was sort of that chapter. And then I sort of moved on and did various other jobs and wasn't sure what to do with my life. So decided I'd apply for GP training, hoping I'd have an epiphany in the first 18 months of my GP training. So I wanted to do 18 months of different specialties. And then partway through that, I got a really bad eye infection. And it basically meant that I ended up missing two months of work with it. And to cut a long story short, it's a really rare infection called acanthamoeba that you get in contact lens wearers. And with hindsight, I was a walking risk factor because I did everything wrong. But then it just destroyed the top layer of my eye and I got a super infection with it. And the brief version is that my eye sort of self-perforated in the kitchen mirror one day. So I ended up down in Moorfields in London, who were brilliant. And I can't thank them enough, really, because they've really looked after me over the years. And I haven't been an easy patient because I've had also every complication you can possibly have. So I ended up with a corneal transplant sort of the next day. And I've got secondary glaucoma, so I've got tubes that had to be put in and all that sort of stuff. But it certainly taught me, I definitely learned a few things from that. One, so my knowledge of ophthalmology is a lot better than it was before. I've got a new appreciation for the transplant service. Like, it's amazing. I don't think when people are filling out the forms, they quite realise the impact that can have.
I remember we were chatting before the podcast and you said that one of the ways you know when you're stressed is things start, or every time it's failed, it's been in a period of your life where you've been particularly stressed. Is that right? And most of us don't look after ourselves like that. We think that our organs are completely expendable, I guess, and it's not until you've had something really important happen like that you stop taking yourself for granted.
Yeah, completely. And it's been, there's been times when it's funny because when I'm getting really stressed, it's normally one of two things that happen. Either A, I get injured, or like in terms of like running injuries or whatever, or something goes wrong with my eye. And it's always, and that's always the way. I guess the other thing that I learned from my eye, I'm forever grateful for it, is that I had one operation with they would put a tube in my eye and they said, right. And as my one consultant was walking out of the door, she said, oh, and by the way, you can't run anywhere for 6 weeks. At which point I sort of hit the ceiling and grabbed her back in because, that was my get out. That's how I'd coped with the whole thing. So anyway, we compromised on indoor bikes and she said, right, you can sit on a stationary bike and that's it. So I was like, right, I'm going to learn to ride a bike now. Anyway, that sort of led into me doing triathlon randomly. I'm not a swimmer, but I knew how to swim. And sort of within like a year of doing it, I found myself in Canada doing the World Championships for my age group, Great Britain. So yeah, and if it hadn't have been for all my eye stuff, that never would have happened.
It's amazing how when the bad stuff comes, which you'd never want it to happen again, you never wish it on anybody, but often it does produce a change of direction or something that is beneficial to us, and that actually we would never have seen coming. So it's strange, that, isn't it? Life is strange in that way.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's funny because just before we started recording this, I was thinking about stuff that had happened to me. I thought, what if someone could wave a magic wand and change it, would I not have had all that stuff happen to me? Yeah, I wouldn't change it now, because everything that's happened since then has been so great. And actually, even the downsides, when I'm sat in a hospital bed and overnight and by myself in London and stuff, actually it's fine, because you learn to cope with these things and something good does come out of them, like my triathlon and stuff. And I've got so many amazing friends that I ended up meeting through triathlon.
I think that's the funny thing about resilience. I was reading some research the other day, which was, I guess, slightly depressing. That's, how do you really teach kids resilience and children resilience? And it's like, well, yes, you can teach them about emotional intelligence, you can teach them this and this, but actually the way you learn resilience is by going through crap. And that really does make you stronger. And it's a bit depressing because you think, well, I don't want my kids to have to go through dreadful stuff in order to make them more resilient. But on the other hand, maybe it does mean that issue that they're having with their friendship, or that bad grade that they got, actually isn't the disaster that I think it is. Maybe that's how they're going to learn, and that's how they're going to develop. So I think we really need to get away from our thinking about things being really good or things being really bad, and just actually things are just what they are, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they're just experiences, aren't they? And it's an experience that you've had, and you can take something from it. You can choose to take something from that experience and go forward with it, or not.
I'd call that staying in your zone of power. So, the whole resenting it is like, I wish it didn't happen. It's so bad. Why me? Well, that's nothing you can control. There's nothing you can change. It's happened. Yeah. Whereas if you're staying in your zone of power, thinking, actually, what can I do now? That's what's really important. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you was because I think after this, you've experienced some more issues in terms of overtraining, and then that's gone on. Overtraining syndrome, that's made you go on to really think about the importance of rest and recuperation. I thought that was a message my listeners really need to hear. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I became a partner in 2017. I was living sort of quite a nice partnership life, sort of going along, sort of doing what I could, but didn't have massive responsibility. And then it sort of started to increase, which is good. And that's, what's supposed to happen. So it was last year, and there was a sort of sequence of events. So I think the first thing was that I got a stress fracture in my foot. So then I was on crutches for 4 weeks and working still through it, which was a challenge. Being on crutches wasn't the issue for me. It was that I couldn't go running, I couldn't go cycling. The only thing I could do was swimming, and to go swimming, I had to hobble up with my crutches to the poolside and do it. And I think I was kind of falling apart inside because of that. And I don't think any of my colleagues quite realised at all. So that happened. And then just as I got off the crutches, I was involved with a case of a young girl, and it ended up going to the coroner, and it was very difficult. And it was something that nobody could have foreseen coming. But the way the coroner was sort of wording things was that I was responsible either way. But that really cut me up a lot, because it was a young person, and either way I felt very much to blame, even though it's something that no one, I know deep down no one would have seen coming, but that also played on me. And I found that really hard, because your clinical sort of judgment then is starting to come in to question, and you sort of start to question. Like I was, 2 years into being a partner and trying to stand on my own 2 feet and, be independent, all those sorts of things. But I really started to sort of crumble a little bit with that. And I remember just every patient that came in, just second guessing everything that happened. And you don't really feel like you can sort of burden your colleagues with this sort of stuff, because you think, well, they're just going to think I'm, a bit of an idiot, and I should be able to cope with this. And it's that, I think I've got quite sort of inward thing of that I should be able to cope, and you have to think about why. And I've learned now that, like, why should I? Because I wouldn't treat anybody else like that. And I think that's something that we all have to sort of think about. And then just as that was sort of going on, then we got the CQC call. So, and this was obviously my first CQC inspection, and I was absolutely bricking it. And I thought, we're going to fail it. It's going to be because of me. I'm going to get interviewed, and that's what we're going to lose. And I could see my partners around me were all really stressed, and we were all doing loads of work for it to get prepared. But I was absolutely bricking it. I don't think they actually have any idea of what was going through my head and how I was just having completely sleepless nights. It was going to be me. And I'm sure, and I know that they were having sleepless nights over various other things. But you sort of assume that they're just having sleepless nights over general things, not it being them. But so that wasn't the best. And then the week before CQC came, my eye started projecting again. So then the trip down to London, and we started having conversations about them taking my eye out, which I wasn't very impressed with. So it was funny because like we had the inspection. I remember sort of leading up to it, going out on my bike and it just feeling really hard and thinking, it feels like I'm riding through mud. And then I just tried to go for a run about a week after the CQC inspection, and I just couldn't. And it was like that eating disorder moment again. And I literally just couldn't put one front in front of the other. And it wasn't because I hadn't eaten. It wasn't because I wasn't fit enough. It was literally because I was just completely burnt out. And you look at everything and you look back, and with hindsight, you can see it all happening and that tank sort of draining. And the only way I can liken it is it's a bit like going on a long car journey. You've got a tank full of petrol that I started off the year with, and it sort of went down. There were chances, and I went past garages where I could have stopped and filled it up. But I was like, no, it's okay. I can get to the next one. I can get to the next one. And then it sort of got to where it was all coming to a head. And it's that realization that I've gone too far and I'm not going to make it to the garage. And you can feel the engine stuttering and you just come to a grinding halt. And you keep thinking it'll get there, it'll get there. As long as I can just get through this thing, it'll be okay. But I just couldn't make it. And yeah, and with hindsight, you can see, if you imagine that tank, and this is how I think of it now, is if you imagine having a bucket of water, and we've all got the stuff that drains out, like work and training and family, all those sorts of things. And you fill it up with doing the things that you enjoy doing, like walking the dog or meeting out with friends, going for a meal, stuff like that. Yoga sessions, anything that makes you happy, that brings you some joy, helps to fill that bucket back up. But what was happening to me was that there were just more and more holes getting put in the bucket, and it was coming out faster and faster. And even though I thought I was putting in enough, the holes that were already there were getting bigger, like the work hole with the inspection. And then like my eye was, it's probably always there as a little hole that I just try not to imagine is there, but it is there. But then that all of a sudden got bigger. And when all that's coming out, you unless you do something major to put a hole in one of them, you're never going to win. And that's what happened to me, really.
Yeah. That's really interesting because, you say you were doing your exercise, which for you is part of your re-energizing, but that wasn't enough. So what else? What was missing there from you in terms of the energy filling up, do you think?
I think when you look back, you think, well, I wasn't doing those other things that we know, that I now know, having read about a lot more about it, that actually do make us happy and do help. Mm. So things like those social connections and those relationships, I was, didn't see anyone really for about like a month other than people I worked with, maybe sort of my parents for a Sunday meal, because I was just working and training. And I saw the people that I sort of trained with, which was probably my saving grace in a way. And that was probably the one thing that really did keep me going, was sort of seeing people that I trained with, like that I swam with or that I rode with. But sort of losing those social connections and that sort of downtime, I think it was probably that. And I think it's that also sort of taking care of yourself. Like I wasn't doing yoga or anything like that at the time. Mm. And certainly now I've learned that sort of has definitely a benefit for me in terms of almost like a sort of meditative, but also like the physical benefits, but also the mental benefits of just switching off and just having that headspace. And I think it's just generally like looking after yourself, isn't it? It's that, are you sort of eating well? Are you sleeping well? Are you seeing your friends? Are you doing the things that you enjoy doing? And the reality was that I was kind of enjoying exercise, but I was getting so tired, I wasn't even enjoying it anymore. But that's who we are, I guess.
I think that's fascinating, because I would always think someone who is a GB athlete like you would have completely nailed the looking after themselves, because you need your body to be functioning as well as possible. But I think it's quite possible to focus purely on one well-being factor, i.e. fitness, and completely neglect all the others, which are so important, aren't they? And I know I was reading one sort of personal coach, as in a fitness coach, not a coach, but they were saying that the rest days that athletes have are as important, or if not more important, than the training days. Is that true?
Oh yeah, totally. Like, you think about how you wouldn't give a sprinter a sprinting session and say, right, sprint 100 meters. And as soon as you get to the finish line, turn around, sprint another 100 meters. And I'm going to expect every 100 meters to be as good as the last one. And you're going to do that for an hour. You're going to get a drink, and then you're going to do that for another hour, and do that for another hour. But that's what we're doing in life a lot of the time. And unless, and so actually, if you've got a sprinter, you get them to run 100 meters, and then they have like 5 minutes, 10 minutes rest. And then they'll do that session, and then they'll go home and have a nap, and then come back and maybe do another session later. And then that evening they'll have a massage and sleep really well and have a lie until 10 o'clock or whatever. So actually their rest is more important in many ways. And if you think of it in sort of an athletic terms, is if you don't rest, then your muscles don't adapt, because the whole time with training is you're causing those sort of little micro traumas, and that's what stimulates muscles to develop and all the rest of the stuff. So you need that rest time for your body to develop. And actually, I think that work-wise, we're exactly the same. Because if you work and work and work, we all know you're not as productive. I'm nowhere near as productive at 6:30 as I am at 9:30. I know that. And I can tell, but then there's a part of you that's like, no, go hard or go home, like, come on, like, keep going. And I think as a profession, we're terrible for that in many respects. And I think it's learning that actually the time off is just as important, if not more, as when you're there. And that whole presenteeism thing, I think, wasn't as much maybe in medicine at one point, but I think it started to creep back in a bit. And I think it's hard to rein back from that. And I think it's also hard to admit when you are struggling. And I think that's something that I've really struggled with that. And that's sort of being vulnerable with somebody. And there's great strength in vulnerability. And I think we should probably learn that, and that it's acknowledging that vulnerability within ourselves to say, actually, we're not invincible. So we do need this downtime. And maybe if things are getting crazy, then we need to take time off or have a bit of extra leave or something like that. But it's having the confidence to have that vulnerability with somebody, I think, is really important.
But we don't do that, do we? We don't go, oh, I've been working really hard, I'm feeling a bit knackered, I really need some time off. Or we just about allow ourselves to say, oh, I really need a holiday. Thank goodness I've got a holiday coming up in 6 weeks' time. I'm just living for my holiday. But we don't go, this week has been awful, therefore tonight I'm going to cancel those plans and I'm going to go and have a bath. Or I'm going to do something that's going to soothe and look after me.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think actually what's fascinating is if as a profession we cared for ourselves anywhere near as much as we cared for our patients, we would be a far healthier, more motivated, and our well-being would be far greater. And I think actually we have a lot of compassion for other people, but to have compassion for ourselves, we struggle with.
Yeah, we really do, don't we? And I think this whole idea that we're weak if we need a rest, or we're weak if we need a break, or we're weak if we're struggling, it's just so pervasive and it's so destructive. Yeah. And it's not it's not helpful. And I think it's not helped by the workload and the fact that if you do notice someone else is struggling, then maybe you don't say anything, because that means that you've got to take some of their work off them or see some of their patients, or, it's hard, but it's so vital, because we're losing so many people in terms of people leaving or having to cut back down or burning out and going off with stress and sickness and things like that, that actually it's a false economy, isn't it? What did you do? What did you do when you had that burnout?
So that's interesting. So this is where I'm a bit of a hypocrite. So I remember I don't think any of my colleagues actually knew what happened. I think I was really embarrassed, actually. If I'm absolutely honest, I was quite embarrassed about the whole thing. Because you think, I've done this to myself, and you think there were so many opportunities that I could have had, and there were so many things that I didn't have to do, but I did. And so I think part of that, and I think part of it is the stigma, and that you think, just like we said, is that you think, well, I should have been able to cope with the stress of the inspection. I should have been able to cope with the coroner asking me various questions and all this sort of stuff. And I shouldn't have been in the position where I had a stress fracture, and all those things played into it. But I think actually what happened was it really made me sort of look inside and look at what had happened. And I reached out to a friend who's a sports counsellor in Australia who works in this area, sort of mainly with athletes. And she's looks a lot at, in terms of your recovery and that sort of area for athletes. And she's got like a system of like check-ins, and it's really interesting. I started doing it, and it's been the best thing that I've done, because it's a way of checking in on yourself, but there's an accountability, because you have to do it, because I get an email saying, here's your check-in thing, check in please, sort of thing. So, I'm a people pleaser, so I had to do it. So you do that, and it's just thinking about, and it's almost like, and we could all do it, and everyone that listens to this could do it. And it's just having that. So it's on a Friday, which I think is quite a good time to check in on how you're feeling. And it's thinking about how you're feeling. So how are you feeling physically? So in terms of athletes, it's like, do your arms and legs feel heavy when you're doing stuff? Are they burning? Those sorts of things. But actually that applies to any of us. Like, do you have enough energy? If I said you want to go for a walk around the park, could you? Because if actually you're so knackered that your legs wouldn't take you, then you've got an issue. And things like, are you eating? Are you looking after yourself physically? Talking about sleep. So think about how you're sleeping. So are you sleeping well or not? Because that's normally the first thing that I think starts to go with us. And it's quite interesting when you speak to people about how they're sleeping and what's keeping them awake. And why is that keeping you awake? And is there something you could do to help that? And then thinking about sort of your sort of mental and emotional factors, like how are you feeling in general? Like, are you feeling sort of depressed or low? Like, are you feeling like anxious? Because there's nothing worse than that constant adrenaline when you are on the edge and you've got it coursing through your veins, and you think it's okay, it's just the duty doctor session that's making me like this. But actually, it's not. It's because you're sort of approaching that edge, and your cortisol levels and everything else are just like pumping. So it's thinking about those sorts of things, and then looking at like your stressor levels. So like, how have you got extra stress? Like, have you got an issue with one of the kids at school that's stressing you out? Have you got an issue, with one of your family members that's in a nursing home? Have you got problems at work, like, not getting friction with a colleague, or a difficult patient, or a complaint, or something like that? Have you got extra stresses, physically? Like, are you training for a fun run or a marathon or something like that? Because all those sorts of things, they're all stresses for us, and they're all holes in that bucket that we have. And unless we check in on how we're doing with all of that, then we're never going to understand that we need to stop, we need to slow down, we need to help to try and fill it.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, because I think we all know the big stresses in life, like, losing, somebody dies, that's a huge stress. Getting divorced, huge stress. Moving house, huge stress. Getting married, huge stress. Maybe, starting a new job, huge stress. But there's all these other stresses, micro stresses, like you said, like knowing you've got a CQC inspection, having a complaint. Well, that's a huge stress, having a complaint. have a difficult relationship with someone, having to have a difficult conversation. One of your kids is a bit poorly. This has happened. I know Rangan Chatterjee, who's written the Stress Solutions, the GP, does a brilliant podcast. He talks about micro doses of stress. So often, he could say you could have had 20 microdoses of stress before you even have your breakfast, like the alarm clock goes off and you didn't sleep very well, a little bit of stress. You run out of toothpaste, a little bit of stress. You have argument with your partner, a little bit of stress. This, that, and one of your children is rude to you, micro stress. But it builds up. And I think one of the phrases that we use that is not very helpful sometimes is, well, no one's died, so, things aren't that bad, Actually, we don't know that, we don't realise how much effect these little stresses are having on us. And yes, we might not be experiencing a big problem that other people can recognise, but actually it builds up, like you said. And if you're not filling up your energy bucket, you're just going to keep leaking, and all these tiny holes are going to keep poking, and it's keep going to go out.
That's it. And I think that the whole thing of like saying, oh, well, no one's died. It's like when we say, oh, there's so-and-so's, there's people worse off. And you think, but that doesn't diminish the experience that you're having. No. That doesn't diminish what you're going through right now. Just because somebody hasn't died, that doesn't have to happen for you to feel bad.
Yeah.
I think that's, but your sort of analogy, the micro stresses, if you think of that sort of in athletic terms, that's exactly what happens with a stress fracture. Is that you pound, you go running and you pound the feet, and the bones get that little bit of stress, and every so often it's a bit of stress that's just a little bit too much, and you get those microfractures. And there's a theory that you sort of get these microfractures that happen, and each time you're pushing your luck a bit too much. So like you're not eating right, or you're doing too much mileage, or you've done it too soon, all these sorts of things. But all of them sort of confine, and you sort of get microfracture after microfracture, and then one day you just push your luck one step too many, and bang, it's gone. And I don't think that's too indifferent to what happens with us, is that everything mounts up, and then one day you find yourself sat with your head and your hands on your desk thinking, I can't do this. And I think it's us being aware of that. And I think part of it is actually us accepting that we are fallible as humans.
Yeah, 100%.
Which, naturally comes to doctors.
And I'm reminded of the stress curve, the Yerkes-Dodson stress curve that I use all the time with training, that basically performance on the x-axis, stress on the x-axis, pressure on the x-axis, performance on the y-axis. And, with increased pressure comes increased performance. We need a bit of pressure to perform. But we think it just keeps going up and up and up and up, but it doesn't. You start to, with too much pressure, you start to go down. And your analogy of the petrol in the car, I think is brilliant, because so many times as professionals, we think, oh, I can just make it to the next. I know I need to refuel, but I can just make it. But actually, you can't. There is definitely a finite amount. We are physical beings. We wouldn't expect a car to make it when it literally doesn't have enough petrol, but we think we can. And because we think that the stress will just keep going. But the thing about burnout is it's very physiological, isn't it? You literally burn out your hypothalamic axis, your cortisol, because you've had so much increased cortisol, you've down-regulated your own production. Suddenly it's all gone, and you genuinely are burnt out, and all the energy has gone. And I think we're very bad at realising that could happen to us until it happens to us. And then we think, oh, crap, this really did happen to me. And it takes a while to recover from, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'd say I'm pretty much touch wood recovered now, but God, it took me months of just sort of doing one. I remember I was allowed to do one session a week that was like a proper, as I'd term it, proper hard session. So I was like, right, I'm going to go rowing because I've got my rowing mates. So that was great, and that I had that sort of social element, and it's just sort of taking step by steps. And the really good thing, other than all this resilience thing, is I was like, right, I need something else in my life other than work and training, because that was all I did, really. So anyway, so now I've got my dog, who I can't imagine being without. And I think that was like a moment when I was like, right, okay, I need something else in my life. And everyone's got their own thing, but I think sometimes it's those sorts of things. But that was, like another good thing to come of it, certainly.
And when we spoke before, you were telling me about this really innovative system that this coach has got you to do. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant about this system of not just, athletes you know that you've got to hit certain targets for training every week, but actually she's completely flipped that on her head and made you reach certain targets for rest every week.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so I fill out that check-in, and then basically she tells me how much I need to do with my filling my tank stuff. So all the stuff that I get, I think about. So it's all got like points allocated to it and that sort of thing. But the simple version that anyone listening to this could apply was, if you, on a Friday night, if you're driving home from work or sat on the train or on the bus or anything like that, just like check in with yourself and think, oh, how am I feeling physically? Like, am I feeling full of energy and I'm ready and raring? Or do I want to collapse on the sofa? And how do I feel like mentally? Am I exhausted? Am I getting snappy? Am I being irritable? Am I feeling anxious or low? Like, have I got lots of stresses? Am I sleeping well? Am I eating well? And if those things, you're starting to think, actually, well, this is bad and this is bad and this is getting worse, and then actually that's indicating to you that those things you need to do over that next week fill your tank up need to go up, because otherwise it's going to drain out. It's going to drain out a lot quicker than you can imagine. And yeah, I get like a points-based system, and as someone who's quite sporty, I quite like having a target. I like to see everything turning green. I hate it on the app when it looks red. I can't just bear an orange. I'll run up and down the road in front of my house to make sure that it's green and not orange because of the mileage. So that sort of stuff. And so actually, as if you have a number that you have to hit, then you think, right, okay, so maybe it's on a Friday night, you're driving home, and you think, right, okay, I'm feeling terrible. I'm going to do 5 things next week that are good for me. So I might have a bath. I might go meet a friend for coffee when we can do that. I'm going to go out for a walk twice. And telling yourself, right, and put a number on it. Because there's evidence that if you put a number on it, or you tell somebody what you're going to do, that there's a much greater chance that you're going to do it. So maybe you get home and say to your spouse, child, dog, cat, whatever, I'm going to do 5 good things next week, and write them down. Like, put it on the fridge, like put what number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the fridge and fill them in as you go. And remember that each of those things you do mean more to you as a doctor and as a person than anything that you'll do like work-wise. That will be of more benefit to your patients, to your family, to your friends, than anything that you'll do. Doing an extra audit at the weekend isn't going to make you a better doctor, but I'd be willing to bet that having a bath and having a meal with friends or Skyping someone you haven't spoken to for ages actually will make you better, will make you happier, and you will function better. And I think we really need to learn that and not feel that it's just work, because it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, that is such wise advice. Doing an extra audit won't make you a better doctor, but Skyping an old mate might. And it's so true. All the evidence points to if you are happy at work, you will be productive at work. Not not if you work hard, you'll be productive. It's if you're happy, you'll be productive. And I think the thing that I've realised, and I recognise this in myself, I'm quite good at doing the whole, right, I've got to eat properly and I've got to do this X amount of exercise a week. I'm not very good at saying I've got to do this amount of nurturing a week. And I'm starting to learn how important those rest and digest activities are for us, that get us into our parasympathetic zone, meditation and yoga and sitting in your hot tub or whatever it is, that switching off, that nurturing, that self-compassion is as important as the drive bit of the running and doing. That's as important as me doing my 0 to 5K app, or doing my gym circuit session or something like that. And it needs to be in balance. Otherwise, all we're doing is flitting from our drive zone to our threat, adrenaline zone, and we're not going anywhere near that parasympathetic rest and digest thing.
Yeah, that's it. And I think part of it is, I think in sort of, I guess doctors are always considered high achieving professionals and all that sort of thing. And to do that, you have to have that work ethic and that drive to do it. And I as an individual, I've always very much been like a go hard or go home type person. I'm the one that's always like, yeah, we'll do an extra rep. No, we're not stopping. And my friends when we're training, wind them up, and we'll get everyone going. And I think it was only because of what happened to me that all of a sudden I really understood what I needed to do. And we see it as a weakness to say, no, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that because I'm going for my bath. And like in my head, for me to say that would be like, is really hard. Or even to say, I'm not going to do my bike session because I'm knackered. And it's taken me a long time to accept that actually, if you are really tired, what's the point in you forcing yourself into doing anything? Because you're not getting anything from it. You're going to make everything a whole lot worse. And I think that's not just with sport, that's with everything. If you get in and you've got a work project, if you are absolutely shattered, don't do it, because you'd be better off not doing it, sort of recuperating for the evening and then just doing it later date, because it'll be there tomorrow. And yeah, but I think so much of it is getting over that stigma.
Yeah. And the best advice anyone ever gave me actually was when trying to do your work, it's like follow your energy. If you feel like doing that thing, do it. Do it now when you feel like it. If you really can't face it, don't force yourself to do it. Yeah. And I think as well, you know, speaking as a middle-aged woman, and I'm reading the Caitlin Moran book at the moment, More Than a Woman, which is hilarious and fascinating. And she talks about the fact that there's so many other commitments in life that literally work is her joy, because everything else she's got to do, she's there for everybody else. She loves work, but then there is no time. Mm. And I think we have to fight for that time to nurture and look after ourselves, because no one else is going to fight for it. But B, if you want to be there to look after other people, you've got to do that resting for yourself. Otherwise, you know, you're just no good, and you're not a very pleasant person to be around. Well, I know I'm not when I'm strung out. I'm much more compassionate and caring and tolerant and patient of teenagers when I feel I am in a good place, and my energy bucket is full. Otherwise, it's just a disaster.
That's it. Well, I guess it's kind of there's a couple of analogies there, isn't it? There's like that whole thing of, you know, on the planes, you've got to put the oxygen mask on first, because you're no good to anybody else if you can't breathe. And it's a bit extreme, but actually it's just like that. And I think at work, a lot of the time we can spend a lot of our energy and investment a lot in sort of making sure our colleagues and other staff members are fine, and you do so much for them, but actually you're never looking at yourself, and you're never putting on your own mask. So you're putting on all their masks one by one, but the whole time you're struggling even more. I think the other sort of way to think of it is going back to that car. And if you're spending the whole time looking around the car, and your passengers being your colleagues or your family or whoever, and it's that you're like, no, I've got to get to the next, I'll make it to the next one because I've got all these people in the car and they don't want to stop. I've got to get all of them to wherever we're going. They've got to get there. But actually, if you don't take the time to take yourself into the petrol station, no one's getting anywhere. No one's going to make it to that destination because you're going to run out. And actually, we've all got to, like you say, no one else is going to do it for you. And you are your own most precious resource.
Mm, so true. So Jess, where are you now? How are things going now for you? Are you fully recovered? So touch wood, fully recovered. I've been out this morning with the dog running on. I'm doing a lot of like running off-road and on the mountains at the moment, so that's quite nice. Because it's not time related. So I've struggled with trying to get back my running speed since it all happened, and I realised that sort of chasing times, especially once COVID hit, wasn't really going to help me, because it wasn't helping my self-esteem. I think, well, the times aren't getting better, and I was sort of feeling frustrated in that respect. So I was like, right, I'll go and hit the hills, which is great because your watch is kind of irrelevant, because one day it's like muddy and you're wading through stuff, and the next minute a dog's chased a deer, so you've got to go back and get her and stuff. So that's been really good. And I think as training goes, is that I'm hopefully on the way to recovery, and hopefully can do some competing again next year. But I think I've sort of certainly learned a huge respect for where sort of rest, recuperation and resilience lie in the sort of hierarchy of importance in my life. I think, they were very, very negligible at the very bottom of anything before. But then now it's up there at the top, because without that, I can't imagine being where I was on that day when I couldn't run, and then bumped into 3 people I knew on the way home as I was walking home, doing the walk of shame, trying to put a happy face on it, and then realising that the next 6 months were going to be pretty difficult for me. So I think it's just understanding, learning from where you've been. And sometimes you have to
they say you've got to get to the bottom. And I don't believe you have to hit the bottom, but I think for some people like me, that probably had to happen to me for me to believe it could happen, because I refused to believe that it could, and I thought I was invincible. And I think if I was, sharing what happened to me, I think is probably just trying to let people know that actually we aren't invincible. We think we are, but we're not. And if it stops anybody else from getting to that point, be it from, work, exercise, home, whatever it is, then it's a story well told.
And we're so grateful for you sharing it with us today. What would your top 3 tips be for any professional, be it doctor, lawyer, accountant, other manager, leader, who's sort of feeling a bit burnt out and feeling, what do I do? What are your top tips?
I think the first thing I would say is allow yourself to be vulnerable. Either if you can't be vulnerable to somebody else and say, I'm knackered, I can't do this, I need a break, then at least to start with being vulnerable to yourself and saying, okay, I acknowledge this, and actually realise that in you acknowledging that and that vulnerability is a huge strength, and it shows that you are a far stronger person for doing it than for just hiding it and trying to pretend it's not happening, because it is happening to lots of people right now, I'm sure. I think my other thing would be to try to check in with yourself. So technology is great. So put a reminder on your phone, like check in on a Friday at 6:00 or whenever it's going to be. Put that reminder in there and do it. I'm sure there are loads of apps out there that you could use for it. It's something that we all have to do. And I think it can be one of those things that we say, I haven't got time to do it. Well, I'd be amazed if you genuinely haven't got time for 2 minutes to sit there and just think, because actually we all have, and it's an investment of your time. And I think sometimes we put off self-care type things because we say, I haven't got time for that. But actually, as we've talked about, that's the one thing that you should have time for more than anything. You should have time for that over Docman or admin or paperwork or anything like that. And I think the other thing is just to be kind to yourself, because we are all, as I said before, we don't care for ourselves anywhere near as much as we care for patients, and we don't talk to ourselves like we would talk to our friends, but we need to, because telling yourself that you're a failure because you can't do because you're afraid of the CQC inspector isn't going to help anything, and it's not true, but is certainly something that we all need to sort of just acknowledge and just be kinder to ourselves in everything. Yeah.
Thank you. If there's anything I can add to that, I just think that is such good advice. If only we could make ourselves take it.
Yeah,
that's the thing. So so Jess, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I do just want to say to anybody listening, if you are feeling at the edge of burnout, the end of your tether, then please get some help. Please go see your own GP, access the practitioner health program, access your own employee assistance service. Go and talk to a friend. Do something about it. Do not suffer in silence, and do not feel any shame in doing that. And I think everybody else, remember that, life is precious. Our bodies are precious, and we only have one of them. And that involves your mind as well as your physical body. And we need to look after ourselves, and rest is just as important as achievement and everything else. So just be good to yourself, be kind to yourself, and listen to your body. It knows what you need. So Jess, thank you so much for being with us, and love to have you back another time to chat further about this. It's such an important topic.
That's great. No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please share it with your friends and colleagues. Please subscribe to my You Are Not a Frog email list and subscribe to the podcast. And if you have enjoyed it, then please leave me a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. So keep well, everyone. You're doing a great job. You got this.